Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am your host. It's a very special episode today. We'll get to talk about a Utah draft player again. This is going to be the one time that this happens. We got Devin Lloyd last year, got to rave about him, and I appreciated that opportunity. This year, we'll get to talk about Dalton Kincaid. So excited to dive into all the tight end madness with my guy Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How are you doing today? New background, looking great. How's it going over there?
Not too bad. I have another shelf on the way. So those of you with OCD that are wondering why I only have one on this side and not over here, it's coming. It's on the way. Don't worry about it. I'm doing very well. I can't wait to talk about tight ends and see where our list ended up.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Excited to dive into this. It's a great draft to need a tight end. I'll say that before we get started here. We did want to first of all kind of take a look back, like we have been doing on what the Chargers tight end group looked like in 2022, and maybe kind of assess really where is the need for tight end with this team. And so we'll get started with that conversation. Before we do, as always, if you are watching this, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and if you are listening, please leave us a review or a rating. All of that really does truly help us continue to grow the show as we approach the start of free agency, like the real nitty gritty of the draft. Obviously, we want you guys to make sure you're not missing any kind of Guilty as Charged content that's coming down the line. So, Tyler, we talked a lot about the tight ends throughout the season. Obviously, took a bit of a step back for a variety of reasons. What's kind of the one area you want to see the Chargers hit on in terms of the tight end group that really needs to improve going forward?
Ooh, see, I feel like this kind of gives some things away, but I would love someone who challenges the defense as much as possible. There's a variety of ways we can express that. Of course, we'll talk about it. So I don't want to, give it all away, but I think the Chargers have now, assuming Donald Parham is back, a solid blocker in him. I think Gerald Everett is fine. I think that Trey McKitty maybe can get better. I think you just have some guys that can do some things closer, maybe to the line of scrimmage. But what about guys who can do things down the field a bit more? And if you talk about someone like Justin Herbert and what I think they'd like to do with this offense, I want someone who's a bit more dynamic down the field. So that doesn't mean that that's how I ranked these guys. The tight end prospects, I guess for those who are wondering, we don't rank them by their fit with the Chargers. We just rank them based on their prospect status in headed to the NFL. But I'm looking for someone who can challenge the defense as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the point about ranking them. We rank them, grade them as is, and then we talk about them, how they fit with the Chargers. So we'll do this with every single episode, right? We'll rank the running backs, the receivers, the edge rushers, everything. Somebody like a Keon White, edge rusher from Georgia Tech, maybe he might not be a super clear fit for what the Chargers run on defense, but we'll still talk about him and highlight how he could potentially work out with the Chargers. So we'll do that with the tight ends today for sure. In terms of the review, I think what was really lost from the 2021 group to 2022, you mentioned, the dynamic ability. And I think that also applies to the position group as a whole, because Gerald Everett, I think, is a really fine receiving option. I think you can do a lot of different things with him. And obviously Donald Parham getting hurt did not really help. But, Steven Anderson, they were able to use him in a variety of ways as their third tight end, screens, wheel routes, the leak concept that is so popular, in today's NFL and college football, in that same vein. They didn't have Donald Parham, right? But they didn't have a third guy either that could really be kind of a Swiss Army knife to do a lot of everything. And, the games that Donald Parham missed because of his concussion, Steven Anderson was that guy who really kind of stepped up for them. And, he played some fullback for them because Gabe Neighbors didn't really pan out. They didn't really have that third guy who could really kind of do a lot of everything. And I think that was obviously what you're hoping Trey McKitty can be, but it just didn't work out. So they were way too dependent on Gerald Everett being the guy. And I think his role kind of changed throughout the season to not really what they signed him for because they didn't really have any other options. So, they need to get more dynamic down the field. I think Gerald Everett can help in that regard too, but they just need more diversity within that tight end room as well, I think.
No, that's a really good call with Steven Anderson, a player that I didn't really know what to make of him heading into the season. Then suddenly
Mhm.
I would have voted him for a Pro Bowl fullback
Yeah,
because he was excellent for the Chargers. And whatever it was, I don't know why they didn't feel as comfortable doing that with Xander Horvath, who they drafted. But with Steven Anderson, Joe Lombardi had a legit plan for him, whether it was doing some fun, tricky things or just being a fullback in general. Like they were able to use Steven Anderson consistently. I think he had what 3, 4, 5 different touchdowns on the year, some big gains and key moments. He was a really dynamic option for them. They just didn't think they had. I don't want to say they don't have that option because I assume that Xander could be that, but they
sure.
clearly didn't think that they had that. So that's a really good point with Steven Anderson, a very underrated player.
Yeah, and signed for super cheap. I think he was like a healthy scratch for the Cardinals down the stretch. But
Hmm.
I think from a general standpoint, like I think teams these days, when it comes to like compiling their tight end room, you're looking for somebody who can do all the dirty work from an inline standpoint, somebody who can work the middle of the field and be that safety valve. Every team's kind of trying to find like a big slot receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that you can split out wide and mismatch against safeties and linebackers, and then generally speaking, if you're a 3 tight end team, you want that third guy to be kind of a mix of everything. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you have a fullback, kind of the same thing. You want him to be able to do a variety of things. So, the Chargers have some work to do with this tight end room because they don't really like we don't really know what to make of Trey McKitty. At best, he's like your dirty work blocker, but
Mm-hmm.
he's not a threat as a receiver to this point. So they've really got to be able to figure out how do you mold this in Kellen Moore's image. And I think if you look at what the Cowboys did last year and the way that they used Dalton Schultz as their tight end one, I mean, he's lining up in the backfield, he's lining up in the
Mm-hmm.
slot, he's lining up out wide, he's lining up in line. Like whoever is a tight end one for Kellen Moore's team, you have to do everything. And then they're kind of mixing and matching, like I said earlier. But I'm very curious to see how Kellen Moore views Gerald Everett because to
Yeah.
me he's not that he's not the do everything tight end one type. To me, he's like a really good tight end two. Very
Mm-hmm.
good replacement for Jared Cook, what they had in him. But the
Yeah.
way that Kellen Moore is going to mold this offense around his tight ends, I think is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what they do. And I don't know if you feel the same way compared to last class, but it feels like this particular class was so much more involved as a blocker at different points,
Mm-hmm.
out wide blocking on screens, inline tight end, H back, fullback, whatever. Like a lot of these guys are doing a lot of different roles. I think this class is a lot better as a blocking group, as like a two-way sort of group. And people have talked about this tight end class is really good. And I think the floor is just elevated for so many of these guys, and why it took me a while to get to someone with like a 3rd or 4th round grade because all
Yeah.
these guys, like some are better than others, but they can block. And that was really impressive. So I think having that two-way, and we'll talk about who and who can do what, but having that would be really beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great kind of transition to what we want to talk about here. Just this tight end group in general. So, I mentioned this on Twitter. A lot of people have talked about how good this tight end class is. I think this is the best tight end class that I've seen since we've been doing this. And this is our 4th draft cycle, which is hard to really believe. Cal Pitts to me is still like far and away the best tight end prospect that I've
Yeah.
graded.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to go 2 through 5 of the next group, that it's all 4 of this class. Like
Mm-hmm.
last year's tight end group was so underwhelming. I mean, Greg Dulcich was my tight end one, and he had like a late 2nd round grade.
Mm-hmm.
And him and Darnell Washington have like very comparable grades right now, and that's a tight end one last year. So
Yeah.
this tight end group, it has a really great top. Like I think a lot of people are obviously kind of pointing out like, tight end hasn't really been a position where you really invest a 1st round pick. But this year you have at least 2 guys who I think are consensus like top 25 players, depending on who you ask. And so for me, this is a year where you take a tight end in the 1st round if you
Mm-hmm.
need one, because this class demonstrated. It's like I think it's hard for a lot of us to kind of differentiate between like what works historically versus
Mm-hmm.
looking at this specific class. And I think this tight end group is a reflection of that.
I think if you're looking historically at just what works and what doesn't, you technically are going to take an edge rusher at 21 then instead of a wide receiver. Like
Right.
you definitely want to lean towards some trends. And if you look at the class as a whole, maybe you feel like you can wait in on tight end. But I wouldn't just look at the history of taking a tight end in round 1 and say, oh, I wouldn't take that player. I wouldn't take some
Right.
player who, if they're worth it. Like if they're worth it, take it. I agree. I do think there's 2 guys who should be top 25. You could argue 3. We'll see how we have ours ranked, but yeah, I think this is a year that you could take some guys, one of at least 2 or 3 guys at 21, and I would get it. Now that doesn't mean that we have first round grades on those guys we want the Chargers to take at 21. In theory, it's unlikely that we would have a first round grade on someone that would be available at 21.
Yeah.
If the first 15, 18, 20 prospects go, you don't really have 21 first round grades. So it doesn't mean that the player we want at 21, a tight end at 21, is a first round grade for us. Oh my God. But they would fall exactly where we want them. And I think there's a couple of guys in this class that we'll talk about that can definitely fit that bill.
Yeah. So for those of you who are kind of newer to the show and this is like your first draft, like really kind of honing in on this, I think when we talk about like a first round grade, like to me that means that this player you think is a top 15, top 16 player in this class. Like I think there's a big difference between somebody who can go in the first round versus this guy has an absolute like clear cut first round grade. And I think generally speaking, if you listen to Daniel Jeremiah or the best in the business in terms of, the draft evaluators, they'll say that if you have more than 15 first round grades, that class is like a stacked class. And I think generally speaking, teams will kind of follow that same path where like, if you're putting a first round grade on somebody, it means that you think that they are a truly like elite talent at their position. And, we'll see how kind of that pans out come draft night of who isn't on board at 21. But for the most part, like you're talking about somebody that will likely have kind of like a high second round grade, which does translate to being a first round selection. It's just that, having a first round grade, I think is a very important distinction than being a first round player.
Definitely. And this class isn't like the 2021 wide receiver class where there's like 3 blue chip, legit, like top 10 guys at wide receiver, for example, where it's like, okay, yeah, those guys definitely have like, this class isn't a great class because they have like 3 blue chip, legit elite prospects at tight end, but just the guys that fit in that second round or like first round, second round, third round range are all really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And Thomas pointing out the last first round grade that the Chargers had in that draft was Jerry Tillery. So that's a little bit of a position value kind of thing, but some teams will say like, hey, like if we have a first round grade on this player and he's the last first round grade player, we're just going to take that player and we'll figure out the rest later. And unfortunately, the Chargers did that when they drafted Jerry Tillery.
Do you remember if Kenneth Murray had a first round grade from them?
I would think yes, with the way that, at least from a coaching staff perspective, because obviously Anthony Lynn and the defensive staff are very, very high on him. But if they traded up in the first round to draft somebody they didn't have a first round grade on, that would be a very, very bad drafting process.
Yeah, I think I remember them being like, they really liked him and then they interviewed him and then they loved him. So I'm guessing it was like a second round sort of grade thing that maybe squeezed into the first round. I don't know.
Yeah. So I know our first draft, you didn't necessarily grade a whole lot. That was me and Jason mostly. So in general, what's your kind of impression from like a, top heavy talent grade level, I guess, with this tight end in comparison to the past classes?
Like I said, watching Kyle Pitts ruins every other tight end for you after that. In the same way that watching Penei Sewell is like ruining. Now, again, some people have apparently had Slater higher than Sewell. I get that. But watching Sewell, it's just different. So there's nobody that's like that. With that said, I looked back at our 2022 grades, and I think my first tight end appeared at like 60 on the big board, and yours was 49 or 50. Like they barely made it. Whereas I feel like this draft will have, like we talked about, at least 2 guys in that top 25. So is there like, I do think one guy has separated himself, in my opinion. There's definitely one guy I do think that stands above the rest. But I don't like, it's not top heavy. I've gone through 9 guys and I'd be happy with all of them on the Chargers for different reasons and at different spots, of course. But last year, I felt like I was digging and clawing to find some blocking tight end from Nevada who had like 10 yards a game. And I'm like, tight end 10, baby. That's going to be my guy. So I really think this class, like I kept going through tight ends. I'm like, these guys can all do quite a bit.
Yeah.
Some of the guys that we have, 6th, 7th, 8th, I like them. Like, they can do quite a bit of different things. They're not just one. Like, I don't feel like there's one Jelani Woods kind of guy where it's like, boy, that guy's a freak athlete looking guy and he can block. That's kind of it. Like, I don't feel like there's a guy
Yeah.
that's just like that. So a lot of guys can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is a really good group, and I think you could, I graded 10, and I was like, okay, I want to find just like maybe one more and just see where we're
Yeah.
at. And I'm glad that I did because I really like the last one that I graded.
Oh.
So this is a fun group. So for our tight end rankings and for all of our rankings, we're only going to do 8 prospects this year. It's going to save both of us some time, obviously, with the limited schedule that we have, and obviously, with the rush that is the NFL draft season with while you're covering a playoff team. So
Yeah.
we're only going to do 8 players at each position. We'll have one kind of miss the cut honorable mention for each. So really, I guess 9 if you want to be a stickler that way. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how this one pans out. And as always, we do have a sheet that we'll share on here. There we go. All right, so I mentioned him. This is where I'll start us off here. I gotta find the sheet again. Okay, there we go. All right, so my just miss for me is going to be Mr. Braden Willis from Oklahoma. I mentioned Steven Anderson on the show and what the Chargers we're kind of missing him. And I think that's Braden Willis is somebody that I think could fill a very similar role. I mean, this guy, I watched the Oklahoma offense first when I was trying to study Marvin Mims. And the first game I pulled up was their Texas game, and their starting quarterback was injured that game. And they were doing wildcat packages like every other play. Like, I swear it was like at least 15 times. And I was like, what the hell is going on with this? Like, what are we doing here? And Braden Willis was actually the wildcat quarterback for them. And they were actually doing some really fun things with him when I was like kind of doing the rewatch. So he's a bit on the lighter side. I think Oklahoma listed him at like 236 pounds. But when it comes to being like an H-back kind of versatile blocker, I think he can really get the job done. I shared a clip of him, getting a nice solid pancake on one of the Texas outside linebackers. And I think he's just a really intriguing athlete as well. I think he's able to do some fun things after the catch. He was tied with Darnell Washington in yards after catch per reception in this class. And so I think he's a bit of a work in progress in general. But once you get past once you get to this group, I think his athleticism really stands out and just his versatility as well. So I liked him, not enough to put him in my top 8, but I liked him enough to make him an honorable mention.
So yeah, we're on the same page to start this thing already. This is exactly the person that I would have put at my just missed, and for the literally exact same reasons, I thought of Steven Anderson as well. I have nothing to add because we literally had the same idea for this one. Yeah, Braden Willis. I don't know what it is about Oklahoma. I watched Hayes last year, who was just very ferocious as a blocker, and I liked him more. Willis is definitely a bit haphazard at times, but there's definitely a ferocity to his blocking that I really like, and the way they use him. I thought Steven Anderson as well, so I'm glad you brought that up. We're on the same page so far.
There we go. All right, so we'll split this up in our rankings. Tyler, I'll let you go first. We'll do 8 through 6. We'll do 5 through 3, and then 2 through 1. So who's number 8 on your list for you?
Okay, sorry, let me try to get through this. There we go. At number 8, I have Will Mallory from Miami. At number 7, I gotta get these names right. Payne Durham from Purdue. I'm trying to talk, and think at the same time is ridiculous. And at number 6, I have Sam Laporta from Iowa, who I think he's going to take the blue ribbon for offense I hated watching the most this year. I watch, we follow Michael Peterson, and he watches Iowa, and God bless him. Every week he's like, oh, they scored 3 points today. Awesome.
Yeah.
And that's really just kind of watching them. Of these guys, Payne Durham actually surprised me a bit as one of the last guys that I watched. I got to him pretty late, and I think it really was the Maryland game that did it for me, because there's a play where he catches some wide open pass at the 48, whatever. It was just like a seam ball or something. And then he's finally touched and like ready to be tackled at the 38, on the way to the end zone, and he ends up dragging guys like 36 yards or 35 yards or whatever, all the way to the 2 or 3 yard line. I'm thinking, oh, okay, not bad. And then in that same game, I'm watching him run, a whip route. I'm watching him run 2 angle routes from the inline tight end spot. One of them was for a touchdown, and I think what was the other game? Anyway, he was consistently running the angle route. So is he my favorite guy? Not necessarily, but he can do a lot of things very, very well. The 2 sacks that he gave up on the year are a bit more concerning, but I think he's a solid prospect that you kind of want to build and work with. And I have a 3rd round grade on him. And frankly, if they took him in the 3rd round, I would get it. He can do a lot of things. I think he's a kind of like Willis, but more as a tight end than like a fullback type. But again, a bit haphazard of a blocker. And I think sometimes if you're just kind of that kind of blocker who lunges and tries to be powerful up top but forget the rest of your body, that can be a bit problematic. But I liked most of what he was able to do. The numbers are pretty solid. The route running is kind of there. I feel like with Purdue, they were able to do more and like showcase more about what Payne Durham could do. So that was really good to see. So I have him there. Yeah, Laporta at 7, Will Mallory from Miami at 8, and that's it for now.
There we go. Payne Durham, did you know that he's not even in Pro Football Focus's mock draft simulator?
I did look at that, and I was like, man, am I horrible at grading these guys? Like, what did I do?
I know. I went through there and I got to the second. I'm like, wait, I made this 2nd round selection and I was like, okay, Payne Durham, this is who I'm going to go with. Because I really like Payne Durham. I think to me, if the Chargers don't take one of the top guys in the 1st round, I think Durham is the guy that I would prefer, in a 3rd round selection at that point. Somebody that I think, you covered a lot of the points. To me, he's like he's the 2nd best blocker in the class. And I think you can do a little bit. You can look at him essentially as almost like a Michael Mayer discount version, somebody that's going to do a lot of the dirty work in line, somebody that's going to be a nice contested catch player. I mean, his work at the Senior Bowl kind of proved that, I think. And they actually used him at the Senior Bowl as a fullback a little bit too. So I think there is some nice versatility there. But yeah, I get through the 2nd round selection. I'm like, all right, here's Payne Durham, 3rd round. Let's lock it up. And then he wasn't there. And I was like, scrolling up. I'm like, okay, do they have him really high? Where'd he go?
Yeah.
And then I searched his name in there and then he wasn't in there. So I was like, what the heck? You got to get Payne Durham and put some respect on Payne Durham's name at this point.
Yeah, that's surprising. I've watched 2 players now that didn't end up declaring for the draft. They went back to school. So it was oh gosh, who's the Minnesota tight end who's like 6'7", 270. Because apparently they just grow him huge at Minnesota with Daniel Falele and those guys.
Yeah.
Watched him, figured out he returned, and then I watched Cade Stover, found out he returned. So that was fun. So when I saw Payne Durham wasn't on there, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. How did I get through 3 guys that aren't declaring for the draft? But I don't know where he is, and I didn't check the draft number yet.
Yeah, gotta love it. So not going to have a ton of different thoughts here. I do have Cameron Latu is my number 8 tight end, the tight end from Alabama. And then I also have Payne Durham at number 7 and Sam Laporta at, I'm just going to copy and paste this over. I don't know what
no problem.
There we go. And then I have Sam Laporta at number 6. So I'll talk a little bit more about Sam Laporta. I think he's a really interesting prospect. I think, again, that Iowa offense was atrocious, man. It was terrible.
Yeah.
But you look at the way he's being used, and I kept on seeing him go out wide. And I'm like, man, they're really using him like a big receiver at this point, not just like a big slot receiver, like big receiver. And so I'm like looking through all these numbers, right? I go on PFF and, Sam Laporta took 20% of his snaps out wide as like an X receiver for them. His 20% was like 8 percentage points higher than 2nd place in this class. So I think was actually Will Mallory from Miami, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong there. It might have been Michael Mayer as well. But Sam Laporta being that of a versatile of a receiver, I think will lend itself towards him translating towards the NFL. I don't think you want him being like a heavy, big X receiver in the NFL, but I think it's the NFL is pivoting towards this like mismatch, dynamic versatility kind of tight end option. And I think Sam Laporta can do that. I am curious to see really how fast he runs, but I mean, he looks like he's plenty fast on tape. He's able to be a nuanced route runner. He's not super aggressive at the point of the at the high point of the catch, like some of these other tight ends. I think that's probably his big weakness at this point. And that's really where, his drops come into play, is because he's not really like a super physical tight end. But if you want a guy who's going to come in and just kind of be a versatile route runner, be able to do some mismatch things from the very similar to like a Dalton Schultz who can do like backfield snaps, slot snaps, H-back snaps. I think Sam Laporta can be that guy. And he's just a really nuanced route runner. I mean, he's one of the few tight ends on this list that's played tight end for a very long time. And it shows up because he really is able to, snap his hips at the high point of a catch and really be able to route these guys up. Like if you go through his Ohio State tape, there's 2 or 3 times where he really is routing up a safety or sometimes even a corner, and that's Ohio State's defense. So, I think Laporta, he's a very solid, safe prospect in this group, and I think that's going to stand out for teams for sure.
Yeah, he's what's his name? Brian Cook, the safety from Cincinnati last year.
Yeah.
He's kind of like that for me, where you want guys with a bit more upside. That's kind of what you're looking for sometimes, but there's nothing really wrong with a guy who's a safe, good player who does things well. And that really does feel like Sam Laporta. It really, those slants when he was beating corners on the outside, like that did a lot for me to place him a bit higher because, like you talked about with the contested catch and the hands overall, he's not like one of those tight ends as much. And that's why part of the reason he's lower for sure. But watching him be able to do things out wide as like a legit receiver, it was very, very impressive. So Sam Laporta, number 6 for me. Some people have him like 3rd in the class. I can't really go that far unless if you're grading more for maybe being sound and like what they can do day one versus maybe upside. I guess I could see that, but I don't really buy that he's in like that top 3 or 4. But Laporta is like, I think he's Daniel Jeremiah and Dane Brugler was like 4th or 3rd guy in this class, and that was a bit surprising.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see how the big analysts kind of split up these positions, right? Because Daniel Jeremiah loves Dalton Kincaid. He has him like number 9 overall in his class, and then Brugler I think has him as tight end 4. So it's funny to see how different people like different things. So, all right, I'll go next here for my 5 through 6. At number 5, I do have Tucker Kraft from South Dakota State. I'm putting SDSU. I know it's going to bug some people for San Diego State, South Dakota State. At number 4, I'm going to put Darnell Washington there. I know that's going to be a bit of a surprise for some people. But yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. And then number 3, I have Luke Musgrave from Oregon State.
Okay.
So I think
where this is going.
I'm gathering that we're going to have a bit of a different stance here on the top 2 tight ends. But, I'll talk about Darnell Washington first because he's a player that a lot of Chargers fans want us to draft. And I want to understand, taking him in the first round. Obviously, the Chargers just hired a quality control coach from Georgia. Brandon Staley loves the University of Georgia.
Yes, he does.
It's like every fiber of his being. So there will be a Georgia player taken by the Chargers at some point in this draft. I think for me, when you're talking about Darnell Washington, he's far and away the best blocker in this class. I think if you are looking for somebody who's going to be able to walk into the league, handle his business one-on-one, be able to set the edge, seal the backside, win one-on-one pass reps against, edge rushers, Darnell Washington is absolutely your guy. He's got some technique issues, like his hands he's so big, right? That his hands sometimes end up on the backs of his defensive assignments. And so, he'll get called for holding penalties quite a bit if that doesn't get cleaned up in the NFL. But just from a size standpoint, like he's such a unique player. Like there was this time where he was blocking Noah Sewell, and Noah Sewell was like one of the bigger off-ball linebackers in college football. And Darnell Washington just dwarfs him, right? Just swallows him at the point of attack. And so he's a fantastic blocker. I think his athleticism has been a little overstated in terms of like his speed and his elusiveness and quick twitch. And that's really what it comes down to for me versus the other tight ends in this class. I have a hard time picturing Darnell Washington as like a 90 target, 600 yard receiving, 6 touchdown kind of player. I think he can be an elite red zone weapon. I think he can absolutely, carve out a role as a yards after catch threat. But basically, you and I had this conversation. It's like if you took Donald Parham and said, what's the best version of Donald Parham? How high would you grade him and how high would you draft him?
Yep.
And that's kind of where I'm at with Darnell Washington. I think he's an elite blocking tight end, like the second he walks into the league. But I have a hard time picturing him ever being like a legitimate tight end 1 because he doesn't have that kind of route running ability, the quick twitch athleticism traits to really like go out into the slot and route up a safety, right? Like he just doesn't have that kind of versatility in his game, that's okay. He's still absolutely a top 5 tight end for me. He still would have been a tight end 1 for me last year. But I just think there's some concerns from how his game translates to the receiving game from his athletic profile.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have this unique perspective of as Chargers fans is you can look at some of these freaky tier looking guys at tight end in the draft and go, okay, well, we have Donald Parham, and we've seen in the NFL what something like this could look like. And if you had the best and healthiest version of that, what could you do with them? I think Donald Parham is a fantastic tight end 2, who at times I think could be relied on to be a tight end 1.
Sure.
But now I think Darnell Washington probably has more talent in him. And I think, at this point, you maybe could consider his ceiling a bit higher. But I even think Donald Parham is better after the catch, and not necessarily in terms of like long striding and running. We've seen the Darnell Washington hurdles. We get it. But I mean, the make guys miss. I mean, watch any Donald Parham catch where he's got some space to work. He's probably making that defender miss. It happened over and over and over
He's
again.
an insane athlete.
Yeah. He is. It's such a surprise for a guy who's, as big and tall as he is. So Darnell Washington at 4, Tucker Kraft 5, Luke Musgrave at 3. I kind of faked you out on social media, I think, because I said, what if I had this player? Not that I did have this player. And so our 5 through 1 is going to be exactly the same. Actually, our 6 through 1 is going to be exactly the same. And if I watched Cameron Latu, then maybe we'd have the same entire list. I just didn't watch him, so I don't know what to say anything about him. So of course, this is where we ended up. I'm sure everyone's going to bail now because we have no discourse here. But Luke Musgrave at tight end 3. First of all, I want to ask you this question, or I'll ask you now, but answer it later. I thought you had Musgrave at 2, so I'm surprised, and I want to hear why you moved him to 3 instead of 2.
So I did have him at tight end 2 earlier this week. I went back and rewatched some Michael Mayer games, and I just was able to actually watch some of his games from 2021. So it's not that I necessarily lowered Musgrave on his grade. It's more that I kind of elevated Michael Mayer. But
gotcha.
I'm a big fan of Luke Musgrave. I mean, he's definitely more of a project than some of these other guys on here. I mean, the whole Pac-12 didn't play like at all in 2020. He played in 2021, had a good season, and then he only played, I think, 2 full games in 2022. So, there's not a ton of tape on here. But when you talk about like betting on traits and betting on athletic profile, I mean, he was like the 4th fastest player at the Senior Bowl. And, you talked about like, the NFL is kind of pivoting towards these tight ends who can cause mismatches, right? And Luke Musgrave is absolutely able to like go be a vertical tight end. I think that's what he's going to bring to a team. I think he's a good blocker, but when you have a tight end from the inline or from the slot who can go run posts, go run corners, go run go balls, seam balls, all these things, I think it just opens up so many more possibilities as a passing offense. And like from a Chargers perspective, the idea of pairing Luke Musgrave with Gerald Everett sounds pretty good to me, because Gerald Everett's kind of that, yards after catch, short intermediate tight end that they really like. And then you add Luke Musgrave into the fact, and you really have this very versatile pairing with those two. So Luke Musgrave is definitely somebody I think the Chargers would be really interested in for sure.
Yeah, this is the player that I think, I guess it slightly depends on what they're looking for. But if I were to add a tight end to the Chargers tight end room, not necessarily at 21, but if I'm just taking a guy, adding him to the tight end room, this freak of a dude is the guy that I'd love to add to that tight end room, even over guys that I do grade higher and like more. This is someone with Justin Herbert in this offense who this would be a lot of fun, for lack of better words. I mean, he even might be my tight end 2 when all is said and done. I'm not entirely sure. The lack of, total play production, the injury, and being a bit more of a project might keep him at number 3. But to me, there's no tight end who, just by stepping onto the field, will stress a defense more than someone like Luke Musgrave. And I think it stems from him being a defensive end and then having to switch to tight end, because his first step and how fast he is off the line, like right about the time that Jim Nagy was posting the Senior Bowl footage of him, flying off the line and saying that he ran, 20 or 21 miles per hour, which is ridiculous. Right about that time, I was watching Musgrave's film, and you could just see that off the snap, I don't think there's a faster straight line guy in this class than Luke Musgrave, at least of the guys that I watched. And for him to do that at 6'6", 250, I think he's 6'6 and a half or something like that with 250 at the Senior Bowl. It's nasty. And if at some point, if you just don't have the guys to cover that, you do not have the guys to cover that. If you're trying to fake that you're blitzing and then try to drop back into a zone or whatever, you better be able to move. And if you're fast, that's great. Are you big enough to handle someone this tall, this athletic? For someone that tall, you might worry about his ability to block at the line of scrimmage. I didn't find that to be as much of an issue. It tends to be the typical, this guy's very tall, therefore he tends to lunge, or he loses leverage or something. Yeah. That happens all the time. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen with Musgrave, but I felt like it wasn't enough of an issue where I had to knock and ding him points for that. I think when he's able to use his length, I think he's fantastic. Again, he's a very, very tall guy. He's got long arms, and he's a heck of an athlete. So he's a very strong blocker, great length. I think there's just so much you can do with him. Would I take him at 21? I don't know, but I think he'd be so much fun to see on the Chargers because of what he can do off the line.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what the 49ers kind of did this past season and their version of the death lineup, right? When they have George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk out on the field together. Juszczyk's a fullback, right? But they use him like a tight end essentially. Mm-hmm. And the kind of stress that they're able to put on defenses because Kittle can run every vertical route and because Juszczyk can run every single route from a short and intermediate range. I think Luke Musgrave's ability to really open things up there, would be fantastic for the Chargers and just gives them, that much more versatility. If you want to talk about adding speed and versatility and more deep routes to the Chargers offense. Yeah. You take Luke Musgrave in the first round. If you're really into him, maybe he falls to the second round. I don't know, but you add a speed receiver and then you also add Luke Musgrave.
Nasty.
That's a nasty offense, man. And you can get into some really unique personnel groupings from a 12 personnel standpoint, and Kellen Moore drawing things up with Luke Musgrave, a speed threat, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, that passing offense and that personnel package would be incredibly difficult to stop for opposing defenses.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about Tucker Kraft as well, because he's somebody that I'm very intrigued by as well, for him to see really how he tests. I might end up having him lower. It's so hard to tell really how athletic these guys who play in these small schools are. Because, you watch him play against Colorado State or you watch him play against Northern Iowa, and absolutely, he's running past dudes, and that's fantastic. You want to see him dominate against this competition, and he absolutely did. But if he goes out to the combine and he runs a 4.7, a low 4.7 or a 4.8, I'm I might knock him down a little bit. But from a film standpoint, he's a former high school running back, and I love that because it really shows up in how aggressive he is after the catch. I think him and Darnell Washington are the more of I'm going to go try and run you over types. And obviously at South Dakota State, Tucker Kraft is able to do that. So very intriguing background, as a former running back. I think he played quarterback as well in high school, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely somebody I'm interested in. Where he goes exactly, I think is very test dependent for me. But the film is very fun. He's, again, somebody that, lines up in the backfield, lines up out wide, lines up in the slot, does, is involved in the screen game. So there's a lot to like from a Tucker Kraft standpoint too.
Yeah, he's the one with the biggest asterisk for me in terms of where I'll do I have him at 5? Sure. But could he move up? Could he move down? I don't really know yet. And I think I'm going to have to watch more, do more research or something, because I feel like with him, there's two sides of this. One, you see him do things, but in the FCS. But the other side of that is I felt like I didn't get to see enough of him. So I feel like there's a ceiling that he can hit that he didn't get to hit in the plays in the film that I watched him. At the same time, he was already playing against, the competition that he had. So is it kind of in the middle is what I'm saying? What's his ceiling? But then is he maybe worse than we think because of the competition? All you want to see is that he can dominate the competition. I think as a receiving option, he did. There's one play against Northern Iowa where he just drags two dudes down the sideline. He's just it's fantastic. He looks the part. You're watching this guy and he's oh, that is a bigger, stronger, faster presence than anybody else on the field. compared to the other DBs and linebackers. I didn't though get to see him dominate as a blocker as much as I would have liked. There were moments, definitely, but I feel like I just wanted to see a bit more of him dominating as a blocker, which kind of applies more to like the FCS tackles and like a Cordell Volson or something from last year. I didn't really get to see that as much. So he's at 5 for me right now. But I kind of want to see more of him. And I guess, yeah, some of that will come down to at the combine. I don't know where you have him as a grade. Tucker Kraft on this list was my first third round grade. And then Washington, Musgrave, and the other guys, second round grades. So Kraft is a third round grade for me. I don't know where you had him. I'm just curious, like, where's kind of your cutoff for like the third, second round grades on this list?
Yeah. So Darnell Washington is my last second round player.
Okay.
I have him as a lower second round grade, and then Tucker Kraft is high third round grade. And him and Sam Laporta and Payne Durham, like they're all kind of clustered together. I have Tucker Kraft at a 6.4, Sam Laporta as a 6.3, and then Payne Durham as a 6.25. So
okay,
they're all right there grouped next to each other. And Payne Durham too. Like if Payne Durham goes to the combine and has a really great athletic testing, he's somebody that I would move up. But I do have some athletic question marks there for him. So
yeah,
that trio I think is really going to be combine dependent in terms of like how do they stack up fine in terms of like when everything's said and done.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I see Kraft bumping into a second round grade for me just based on combine performance. So I think he
definitely not. Definitely not.
I think he settles there. And then Washington is my last second round grade as well. Okay, we're pretty close. Do you want me to go first on the 2-1 so you can close this thing out for your 2-1?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, cool. To no one's surprise, let me get to this thing. I have at number 1 Schoonmaker. No, I'm kidding. I didn't get to watch him. Michael Mayer. First of all, if you're a Notre Dame fan and you get all salty because I put him at 2, F off. Gosh, heaven forbid I post one thing about Mayer not being tight end 1, and Notre Dame fans came out of the woodwork just to be like, "You're an idiot. Why is Dalton Kincaid better?" I'm like, okay, well, here's the reasons I think he's better, and they're like, well, okay, goalpost move, and they tried some other thing. It's like, I hate you. So Michael Mayer almost made it to like just missed because of Notre Dame fans alone. I will not talk about Dalton Kincaid. I will talk about Michael Mayer, who, again, I think there's a chance that Musgrave is the tight end 2 at the end, but I think you can't deny, I guess, that Michael Mayer probably walks into the NFL and as a guy who gets like 5 for 50 every game kind of immediately if they choose to like feature him a little bit. His floor is very high. His work on contested catches is outstanding. Like if you need a red zone threat, if you were on the Chargers right now and they got to the red zone, even equally or as much as throwing to Mike Williams, I would consider throwing to Michael Mayer because he's just one of those players. Like if you throw the ball at him and it just is anywhere in his radius, he's going to catch it. And it's more than just that he's able to do that. It's glue. It sticks to him. And I love the way that someone like Michael Mayer, my favorite guys that are good at the contested catch, it's not that they can just go get the ball. It's that they get the ball and they can turn and protect the football from there. So if you're on the sideline, if you're in the end zone, if it's a whatever, like you're able to catch the ball and turn and pivot and secure it so the ball doesn't dislodge it or someone doesn't come in late and knock it out or something. Like his contested catch ability is probably better than I can recall from anyone in last year's class. And I feel the same for this year's class. And the numbers do back that up as well. I believe he's first in contested catch rate among most of these guys for a certain number of targets. He's very reliable. And I think there's a lot to like about him. I just don't love Michael Mayer. I almost feel like with what you get and what you see right now is what you're going to get in the NFL. And hey, that's great. Having a prospect that feels like he's safe, solid, no surprises. And again, 5 catches, 50 yards, 6 catches, 55 yards, whatever. Like that being your floor and what you'll probably hit in the NFL is awesome. And as a red zone threat, that's awesome. But that's just kind of it for me. And I don't mean that as a knock at all. It's just like he's good. And I don't know how much gooder he could be from there. He's not going to be your guy after the catch. He's not exactly a prolific route runner, although he can work on that. He's not the fastest guy. And I don't know. And I messaged you before about this. he's like the slowest guy off the line consistently from many different points.
Mhm.
And it's a surprise. I don't know, tight end or blocking in general, but that's the first time I can remember someone just being considered that high, right? As considered, tight end one. I think the consensus he's tight end one. And for him to just be so slow off the line and consistently the last guy off the line, it was concerning. And I think his work as a blocker is fine. I think he's a good blocker. And I think there's few guys that really know how to turn and pivot and flip their hips like he can. I just thought I would see a bit more from him. I guess maybe I came into this one slightly overhyped and came away slightly underwhelmed. And again, I feel like I'm talking negatively about him. He's my tight end too. I really like him. The Chargers took him at 21. I would understand. That's where I think the grade does at least fit the selection, even if I don't think the player does. But a little bit slow. I think the floor is high. Ceiling's mostly reached. I think sometimes when you watch him run like a hitch or a curl or something, you see his leg kind of like swing out to turn rather than be a bit more like precise and concise. And I always thought that was kind of odd. That's just a weird quirk thing. So again, really like Michael Mayer. He's my tight end too. I just think he's going to be a good player in the league. And I don't know if that's where you want to go over someone like Dalton Kincaid, who I have at number one. Take it away.
Yeah. So first of all, I do want to talk about Michael Mayer before I talk about Dalton. I really like Michael Mayer as well. He's got a high second round grade for me. I would totally understand why the Chargers would be interested in him. I think he checks a lot of their boxes outside of the Notre Dame stuff, which is more of a Telesco thing than it is a Brandon Staley thing at this point. But in terms of like the way that the Chargers kind of approached their first two rounds with Brandon Staley, they've really shown that they really want to, value these players who have a lot of consistent production at a high level program. And I think Michael Mayer gives that to you. And I think you could really see him fitting in well and blending well with Gerald Everett. I kind of talked about it. He's not the best blocker. To me, he's like the third best blocker in the class, but he's absolutely somebody that's not afraid to go in there, do the dirty work, set the edge, seal the backside, handle blocking assignments one-on-one. I don't think if you're drafting in the first round, you don't really want him to be your main blocking tight end. Same with Dalton Kincaid for that matter. But there's a lot to like with Michael Mayer for sure. You mentioned the contested catches. He was given 26 contested catch targets last year at Notre Dame, by far the most in this class. Of anybody who has more than 12 contested catch targets, he has the highest rate of them. It was like 62%.
Yeah.
So he is absolutely, a contested catch demon, if you want to call him that. Like, I think he's really able to have a very high floor because of that ability, because of his blocking ability. He's a very well-rounded tight end. And I think of the top four, he's probably the most well-rounded tight end. But like you said, I don't think he has like an elite athletic profile. He's not as fast as Musgrave. I don't think he's as good of a route runner as Dalton Kincaid. He's obviously not as big or as physical as Darnell Washington, but I think he gives you the best of everything. So that's where I'm at with Michael Mayer. I really like the tight end. I think in most years, you're probably talking about Michael Mayer as a consensus tight end one in a class outside of Kyle Pitts. And again, I love Dalton Kincaid, obviously. And so I went about watching Michael Mayer, wanting him to kind of make me like force me to put Dalton Kincaid lower. Like, I know that's like people are not going to believe that, but like it was the same thing with Devin Lloyd last year. Like, I loved Devin Lloyd. I love Dalton Kincaid, but I want somebody to really like show me that they are a better prospect than these two players. And so I really did my best to kind of separate the Utah, my alumni connection to the University of Utah. And I did want Michael Mayer to like be better than Dalton Kincaid. It just didn't work out that way. So for me, Dalton Kincaid is by far the most versatile receiver in this class.
Yeah.
I think if you really watch the Florida tape especially the Florida tape in particular, he was the guy that Florida was double teaming. And that was when Utah was at their healthiest. That was when Utah had Brant Keithy, they had Devon Vele, they had Mekhi Bernard, these their best receivers who were not healthy at the end of the season. Everybody was healthy against Florida, and Florida was double teaming Dalton Kincaid. Like, that's how much Florida respected what Kincaid is able to do as a receiver. I think he's despite not playing tight end for very long, he only played 1 year in high school football at all. I think he was a lacrosse guy before that. Despite his kind of freshness to the position, like he's an incredibly nuanced route runner, and he can do every single route in the route tree. Again, not as athletic, physically gifted as Luke Musgrave, but if you want somebody who can really attack a post corner route or attack a seam route, attack a corner route, a deep out, like Dalton Kincaid is really able to throttle down and make people guess where he's going at an incredibly high level. So, you know, he's somebody like when I picture what Kellen Moore had in Dalton Schultz, I think you can copy paste Dalton Kincaid into that same role, and Dalton Kincaid would have a fantastic season for the Chargers. You know, somebody that can handle all of that. Now, as a blocker, like the way that he's described as a blocker really makes me mad, because you really have to understand like what kind of tight end you're getting,
right?
And the separation of the two positions. Like, is he somebody that you're going to want to put on the edge, handle those one-on-one reps, you know, seal the backside, cut off the front side? No, he's not that kind of blocker. Again, I don't think that's why you draft him in the first round. But as somebody who can be kind of like that secondary tight end, as somebody who can cut across the formation, as somebody who can pull to the second level, somebody who can line up maybe as a fullback, H-back role, he can handle his business in that regard. So this characterization of him as a terrible blocker really makes me upset, because that's not true. You know, is he a Darnell Washington type blocker or Payne Durham? No, obviously not. Again, that's not who he is, but he can absolutely handle his business from a secondary blocker type. So you just have to know what you're drafting. And I think that will really help you kind of understand the evaluation of who you're getting as a blocker. So obviously I love Dalton Kincaid, man. I think he's definitely worth that top first round pick. I think the Chargers would be, you know, I would be thrilled obviously if they took him with the 21st pick. He's absolutely worth it in my opinion. But yeah, I went to Utah. So, you know, if you choose to ignore everything I just said and say, oh, he went to Utah, then, you know, so be it. But I do genuinely believe that Dalton Kincaid is tight end one in this class. And I think his film, his statistics, I didn't even mention this, he has the lowest drop rate of anybody in this class with more than 40 targets. So yeah, I definitely think that the film, the statistics, everything backs it up.
I'm glad you brought up the blocking, because I think everyone believes that tight ends only block next to the tackle, and that's not necessarily the case. Now, maybe your offense calls for that. I don't necessarily think that Kellen Moore's offense would, but if your offense calls for that, go elsewhere. You know, that's not really the fit potentially. Yeah. With Dalton Kincaid, I think he can do enough at the line of scrimmage, of course, but he's also like, if that's all you use him for, then why did you take him in the first round? Yeah, you know, that would be a severe miscalculation of what he's good at. So maybe Joe Lombardi would have, I don't know, but that's not what you use him for. And if you look at the numbers of the 67 pass blocking reps that he had at Utah, he allowed 0 pressures. So it's not like I'm watching some guy who can't block at the line of scrimmage at all. Yep. You know, some people are over, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, over exaggerating the issues as a blocker. I think that he's fine as an inline tight end blocker, but that's not what you would use him for. You use him as a puller, you use him to move, you use him in space, you use him to free up somebody else on a screen. What he can do as a blocker, you know, at the receiver position is fantastic. And I think the Chargers could definitely use that. In terms of what he can do as a receiver, I didn't find anybody in this class who really actually came super close to him as a pure receiving option. I think that Will Mallory can do some of that because he's a bit of a lighter guy at 239. So he's more of like the pure receiver-ish type. I thought Laporta could do it. And we talked about how we thought Laporta was kind of a discount Kincaid. But still, like, no one could do what Kincaid could do, because he's just a bit twitchier and he's just a bit faster. And to go on top of that, he's second in the class in yards per route run. His drop rate is fantastic. He blocks, I think, well enough. I just said he pass blocked 67 times at Utah. No pressures. Like, the numbers look good. The film looks good. You know, if he were maybe a bit more of an athlete, a bit of a better blocker, then I guess, yeah, maybe you'd have him, like, you know, he'd be the consensus tight end 1 over Michael Mayer. I think it really just comes down to what your preference is. If your offense needs an inline tight end, it's not Kincaid. That's not who you want to be your official inline tight end blocker guy. But if you're someone like Kellen Moore, who I think can move these players around and do different things with them, I think that Dalton Kincaid is more your guy. Maybe even Luke Musgrave. Again, nothing against Michael Mayer. I just think he fits this particular style and scheme. And for the Chargers, not that we're ranking based on Chargers fit, but I feel like Kincaid is just, that's the guy that I want. And for his numbers, by the way, to look, his yards after the catch, the numbers where he ranks isn't that great. I would disagree that those numbers and where he's ranked reflects how he is after the catch. I feel like he's much better than that. There were several times against, I think Florida for sure, and against USC, that he was like, guys were bouncing off of him or he was fighting through contact.
Yeah.
He wasn't always necessarily set up in spots where he could take like a shallow crosser and then have a free like 10, 15 yards. You know, some of these guys like Tucker Kraft, it was like the 180-yard play for yards after the catch, and you really didn't see like as much there. Whereas someone like Kincaid, I think consistently got the 3 to 4 to 5 that I think is a bit more realistic in the NFL. So yeah, Kincaid definitely tight end 1 for me. He was like, if I had to separate by tiers, Washington, Musgrave, Mayer fit the second tier. I do think Kincaid has just put himself into a single soul tier in the NFL. And if he goes to the right team, I do think the production will be there. Again, Mayer walks in immediately, has 5 for 50, 6 for 60, whatever. But Kincaid's the guy that's like, okay, when Keenan Allen's out, Mike Williams is out, we got to turn to somebody. Can Mayer get you that 100-yard game to beat the Chiefs? I don't know. Kincaid, I do think he can.
Yeah, again, I'm glad you brought up a lot of those different things. His ability to absorb contact and keep going is something that absolutely is consistently out there on tape. Thomas Martinez pointing this out, and I did want to address this as well, and I'm glad he brought it up. Just like the sheer toughness that, oops, chose the wrong one. But yeah, the Bruin, hopefully that as well. So Thomas bringing up just like the sheer toughness. So people are talking about like Dalton Kincaid's injury history. So just to kind of run through it a little bit, he played the last half of the season with a torn labrum in his shoulder that he suffered against Washington State, and it happened like at midfield, and he went down. They called timeout. And then like 3 plays later, he caught a screen pass and ran it into the end zone for a touchdown. And he played through that torn labrum. You see him. There's a picture of him online with a sling out there. And he missed 1 game. And then he came back and he finished the season strong. He played against Colorado. And against Colorado, he actually hurt his back like pretty severely. And he played the Pac-12 championship game with both of those injuries. Mm-hmm. And like, some people are concerned about the injuries, but it's like he played through them. Like, I promise you, he was able to deal with that kind of tough, like that kind of pain and handle his business. And I think if he had really been fully healthy in the Rose Bowl, you're talking about somebody who would have had made a massive difference in that game up until obviously Cam Rising got injured. But, people are saying like, oh, like he's injured. Like, we're not too sure about it. He didn't play in the Senior Bowl. He played through his injuries. It's just that he's focusing on getting fully healthy right now. And I think that's the right decision for him. But the fact that he's able to do that kind of thing and play through those kind of injuries, I think says a lot about him as well.
Yeah, no, definitely a tough dude. And if you're going to get on Steven about being a Utah fan, I'm a USC fan. So if anything, I shouldn't have Kincaid at number 1 because of the, total of 300 yards you put up in 2 games or whatever. But I do have him at tight end 1. So maybe you can say Steven is biased. I'm not. He's tight end 1. I do think that if you have someone else at tight end 1, I get it. But to me, he's just a tier better.
I appreciate that. So yeah, that's our tight end episode. Before we end really quickly, there were a couple super chats that I wanted to get to, and at least acknowledge. So mine's being super slow. So if you can find the first one.
Okay, there's definitely one here at least, and I'll look for more.
Okay. That was the one I was looking for.
Okay. Cool.
So Christian Hernandez wants to know, how realistically can we trade up in the late first, second round to go get tight end and receiver, or what tight end receiver can we get in the second round if we go back-to-back weapons? So I think, to me, the Chargers need more picks, not less picks. Absolutely, they can go in and get 2 first-round picks like they did with Kenneth Murray. I think you're probably better off to trade down and then do it that way. But we'll talk about like different combinations and stuff like that. But from a sheer pick standpoint, I think you want the Chargers to have more picks, not less picks.
Yeah, I would agree. I need to watch more receivers. At this point, I've watched like 4. So I couldn't tell you what wide receiver in round 2 would be there. To me, I don't know, like it just doesn't seem like at 21 the Chargers are going to have anyone they'd want unless it's Jalen Hyatt or maybe Zay Flowers. But I haven't watched Zay Flowers enough yet to make a decision. So yeah, I wouldn't trade up. Trading back would be great. If I had to trade up for someone, you go at least go get a wide receiver. Like if you're going to trade up in the draft, at least go get the wide receiver that you want. You know, if Addison goes, if Jackson Smith and Jigba goes, then you want Jalen Hyatt or something. Then yeah, I guess that'd be the guy I'd trade up for. I'd rather go trade up for a wide receiver, but otherwise, I'm not for trading up this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I love Dalton Kincaid. I would. You're not trading up to go get Dalton Kincaid. I think that'd be a bad use of resources. You know, Dalton Kincaid will probably be my last first round grade. You know, so I have a very high second on Michael Mayer, but I do have a first round grade on Dalton Kincaid. And I don't think you trade up for a tight end. I think that's not a smart allocation of resources. But trading up for a receiver, pass rusher, I would understand that. But again, I think this Chargers team needs more picks, not less picks.
Yeah, definitely. For what it's worth, don't have a first on Dalton Kincaid. It's literally like if I sneezed, the grade would be a first round grade, but it's not currently there. But I will say, if at the combine, just watching, there are some questions about like athletic profile. If he goes out and just balls out and he's like got this like 9.7 RAS, then that might bump into a first round. For now, he's just barely there as a fringe, and then Mayer is also, he's like a mid second, I guess, if you had to classify it that way.
Yeah, so Dalton's right at the cutoff for a first round pick for me. I've been right at a 7. Anything less than a 7 is not a first round pick. So I love Dalton Kincaid. It's not like I'm putting like an elite prospect grade on him, you know. So just to clarify that as well. And then I had to give a shout out to Gavino Borges in the chat today. He says Kincaid had a key block out in space on a rushing touchdown versus Oregon, third quarter, 2:42 remaining. That's amazing. I think if you also want to see what he's like as a blocker, you should go ask Kayvon Thibodeau and see how he locked up Kayvon Thibodeau in 2 games last year against Oregon. So Dalton Kincaid, definitely an above average pass blocker, in my opinion.
Definitely.
All right, Tyler, any final thoughts on the tight ends and how we might see the Chargers kind of attack this position this year?
I don't know. It's so tough because you fall in love with some guys that are so good, you know, maybe like the top of your list. Then you go, you know, further and further and further and further back into the prospects. Granted, I've only graded 9, so it's not like I've graded the whole class. But you start to think like, you know, maybe if, you know, they can get this guy here, they can get this guy there. I do think the Chargers almost like receiver. If it's rounds 1, 2, or 3, I really don't care. But I do think they have to go take somebody. You need a succession plan for Gerald Everett. Donald Parham is not officially even back yet. And even if he is, they probably move on after this year. They have to go get a tight end. We know they don't like their tight end room. We know they probably want to go get a tight end. So I think at rounds 1 through 3, I think you're in a prime spot to take someone you like. If that's Kincaid at 21, great. If that's, you know, Payne Durham in round 3, great. I think they do need to add at some point in this draft. I'm still torn on whether that's round 1 or not. I think I'm considering it more day 2 now.
Yeah, I understand that for sure. I from a team resource standpoint, I generally agree with that. But we'll get to more of that conversation on our next episode, which will be the edge rushers. So very excited about that one. Before we go, Miguel Tapia did send us a super sticker, so appreciate that. He's been a very faithful listener, live listener throughout our show over here. So appreciate that. So excited to dive into the pass rushers later this week. I think this is, again, in my opinion, the tight ends and the edge rushers are the strongest position groups in this draft class. And so that's how we wanted to start off the draft prospect classes. So very excited to dive in with the pass rushers next time. So like I said, if you are watching this, make sure like the video, subscribe. If you are listening, please leave us a rating or review. We always do appreciate that. And we'll talk to you guys soon.